Chapter 26. Wednesday morning. Doreen woke the next morning, groggy and feeling slightly out of it. Then again, she'd spent the previous afternoon doing research until her brain couldn't handle anymore, and had an early night. She'd hoped to wake up clear-headed. Instead, it's as if she took her deck issues along with Norbert and Manny into her dreams. Make that nightmares. Moving slowly, she got up, had a hot shower, and worked her way downstairs. It was a gray, overcast day. Maybe she hadn't dressed warmly enough. She glanced down at her short skirt and her oversized t-shirt that hung off her shoulder. Her ex would have been horrified. On the other hand, she didn't give a damn. She put on coffee, yawned again, and wished she had braided her hair while she was upstairs. So while standing here, looking out the kitchen window, she ran her fingers through her hair and formed a braid to run down the side of her shoulder. She shrugged and said, "Good thing nobody's here to see me then, isn't it?" She disarmed the security, opened the door, and let Muggs out. She had seen no sign of Goliath. He was probably hiding from the weather. Thaddeus, though, was muttering to himself as he stalked back and forth on the kitchen table. She put out her hand and he hopped on. "Good morning, Thaddeus," she said. He rubbed his beak gently back and forth across her cheek. She chuckled. "That's a lovely good morning from you." "Thank you." With his voice in an almost hoarse whisper, he said, "Thaddeus is here. Thaddeus is here." She stepped out on the deck while gently stroking his feathers. Every time she saw the deck now, it just made her more determined to get a new one. Maybe that was where she should start her day. She'd get a quote from the other place. Like Mac had said, it was possible to save a few $100s by splitting up the order. Of course, there was no guarantee it would work out that way, but he had suggested he could maybe do a trip too. First though, she needed food before heading off to the hardware store. It seemed so strange to not have a million things on her to-do list. She'd already done the typewritten index file for Solomon's folders, plus the scanned summary sheets on each file, and that was all sitting on her laptop for easy access. She hadn't slept well during the night, as she kept thinking about Manny and all the weird possibilities to his case. She understood that, from a cop's perspective, there was probably very little connection between Norbert's hit-and-run and Manny's disappearance. They were 1 week apart and worlds apart, as far as who the people themselves were. But the connection was there, because Norbert had been one of Manny's regular clients. But was that part known when the police investigation had first been launched? As she sat outside with her first cup of coffee, her phone rang. She groaned. "People need to leave me alone early in the morning," she announced. "I've decided I'm not a morning person." But still, the insistent ring wouldn't let her go. She snatched up her phone and saw it was Mac. She hit talk and said, "Good morning." "It's Manny," he said, his tone abrupt. "We matched dental records." She straightened. "Really? Wow, that was fast," she said in satisfaction. And then she winced. "I shouldn't be so happy, should I? I guess I'm just hoping for closure for his family and friends." "No," Mac said, "but at least there'll be some answers now." "Some," she said. "Exactly where did you find him? You mentioned Paul's tomb. Were the remains really in a cemetery? How could you possibly find it?" Mac chuckled. "I guess that's true somewhat. Paul's tomb is a popular hiking spot on Knox Mountain. Manny's body was off the normal path. After all this time," Doreen said. Then she stopped and frowned. "Cause of death? That's not for public knowledge yet. You know it'll be in the news soon enough." "Well, you must have some inkling. Can't I get consultant status or something?" she complained good-naturedly. "I'm not spreading it around. But I do need that little tidbit of information." "Why is that?" he asked curiously. "What can you do with it?" "It'll help me to determine whether he was killed by a John or a friend." "How is that possible?" He may have worked hard to keep the derisive tone out of his voice, but she heard it anyway. She clammed up and said, "I'm not talking to you if you're mean." He sighed again. "I'm not being mean. At the moment, I can't give you a cause of death, because nobody has given us a final answer yet." She groaned. "Which means it's probably not a bullet to the head. You're becoming quite the little forensic scientist, aren't you?" "I'm not a little anything," she snapped. "Well, that depends," he said. "Did you eat breakfast yet?" It took her a moment to handle the switch in conversation to realize he considered her skinny and wasting away. "Not yet," she said. "I'm just sitting here having coffee. I had a rough night." His tone turned solicitous in an instant. "I'm sorry. That's not fun." "No," she said. "I kept thinking of Norbert and Manny. Honestly, I haven't had a chance to go through the files yet. Being busy isn't an excuse." Exasperated, he snapped, "Remember, my desk has high piles of things on it." "Sure, but this could be 2 cold cases solved," she said cheerfully. "You have to open Manny's back up again, because you found his body." "True," he said. "Which means I need to know everything you know." She snorted. "That'll take a lifetime." And she hung up on him. Instantly her mood was much better. She danced into the kitchen, grabbed a second cup of coffee, and called the animals. Goliath shuffled toward her slowly, as if he'd just woken. He meowed, and she bent down to scoop the big tubby into her arms and carried him and her coffee in her hands, while Thaddeus perched on her shoulder, with Muggs running around her feet all the way down to the creek. There she sat on one of the big rocks with Goliath still in her arms and Thaddeus still on her shoulder and said, "We just need to spend a little time here. This water gives me solace like nothing else." Content, at least for the moment. Doreen sipped her coffee as she tried to figure out what finding Manny's body would mean for the investigation. Now they should get all kinds of evidence from the body, if they were lucky. Maybe even some serious forensic evidence. Paul's tomb, though, where the heck was that? She remembered she had vaguely seen it somewhere when she was cross-referencing maps, looking at other things. Probably related to the search in Glenmore for the guys who had helped Crystal escape. At the reminder of Crystal and how her life had been turned around, she brightened yet again. "Mac said a hiking path or something," she announced to her animals. Now why the devil would somebody take Manny out there? She pondered on it more and then muttered, "Of course the answer is, it's fairly out of the way. But if it's a popular hiking spot, then a ton of people and a ton of dogs could be there any given day. So his body must have been well buried." She muttered more as she contemplated the options. But then all of a sudden Muggs started barking by her side, his tail wagging like mad. But instead of jumping up and turning around to see who it was, her shoulders sagged. "You might as well get the last cup of coffee from the pot," she called out. 10 seconds later, she heard the kitchen door bang closed. She chuckled. Mac hadn't liked her hanging up on him again. And that was likely why he was in a foul mood. Well, that was fine. She'd woken up that way, so it was okay if somebody else was too for a while. Besides, she was in a good mood now. She waited until she heard Muggs race back to the house, barking yet again as he greeted Mac. Thaddeus whispered in her neck, "Mac is here. Mac is here." She reached up and gently nudged his cheek. "You're such a great watchdog," she said. Thaddeus settled in against the crook of her neck and leaned his body weight against her. She loved it when he did that. It made her feel loved. She didn't have to wait long before she heard the heavy footsteps crunching toward her. Finally Mac stepped beside her and said, "You don't even greet your visitors anymore?" "Depends if they come in a good mood or a bad mood," she said, looking up at him. But his countenance said he wasn't pissed. She smiled up at him. "So if you're not angry at me, I'll say hi."